Dusty Creek, Wyoming Territory. Summer, 1872. The sun hung like a furnace in the cloudless sky, its merciless heat baking the wooden planks of the town square until the dust rose in ghostly spirals. The air shimmered, heavy with grit and tension. Men clustered in the narrow slivers of shade beneath storefront awnings, their shirts clinging to sweat-soaked backs, collars wilted and stained. Women kept their gazes low, slipping past the spectacle with quick steps and tighter grips on their children. At the center of the square, all eyes were drawn to a makeshift platform, splintered boards nailed together in haste. Upon it stood a girl, wrists bound in front of her with fraying rope. Her chin was raised, though her eyes betrayed a quiet, contained terror. She stood straight, unmoving, as though rooted to the boards beneath her feet by will alone. "Last one," the auctioneer barked, his voice hoarse in the sun and the day's labor. He wiped his glistening brow with a grimy scrap of linen. "Who'll take her?" "Young, quiet, strong enough for light work." A scoff from the crowd followed, and then a voice, sharp and derisive. "Ain't nobody need a China girl who can't even speak English." Cruel laughter crackled through the air, brittle and mean. Her name was Li Hua. She was 18. Her dress had once been red, now dulled to the color of desert clay. Her long black hair was braided tight against her spine, neat despite the grime of travel. She hadn't spoken since the voyage began weeks ago. She hadn't cried either, but her fingers trembled, the smallest betrayal of fear she otherwise refused to show. "She ain't worth $1, someone muttered. "She'll be dead by winter," came another. The auctioneer grew impatient. His voice cracked like a whip. "Come on now, she's the last. Don't make me haul home dead weight." A hush followed, thin and uneasy. Then, boot steps, slow, heavy, unhurried. James Morgan emerged from beneath the saloon awning, a tall man in a dust-streaked black coat, his boots worn from years of use. He moved with the quiet assurance of someone who had seen more than he spoke of and buried more than he mourned aloud. He was 32, a widower for 5 years. No children, just a ranch 3 miles east, where the horses outnumbered the people and the wind never stopped speaking. He came to a stop at the foot of the platform and looked up at her. His face was unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. A ripple of surprise stirred the crowd. 50? For this one, the auctioneer blinked, confused. "She's not for sale anymore," Morgan replied evenly. "I'm not buying a worker. I'm giving her a name. Mine. I want her as my wife." The town square froze. Even the wind seemed to pause in mid-breath. "She don't speak a lick of English," someone muttered. James turned his head slowly. "Neither did my grandmother," he said. "She still built a home and raised 5 children. We understood her just fine." The auctioneer hesitated, brow furrowed, lips twisted in doubt. "You serious?" Without a word, Morgan stepped forward and laid the bills across the platform edge. "I don't play games." Li Hua stared down at him, uncertain. His gaze met hers. It wasn't hungry. It wasn't cruel. Just steady. There were no words she understood, but something in his eyes told her clearly. "You are not an object. You are not less." The auctioneer grunted and called it. "Sold. To Mr. James Morgan." The deputy moved in to cut her bindings. The rope fell away, and she rubbed her raw wrists, blinking hard against the sunlight in the sudden, confusing stillness. James didn't touch her. He simply waited until she looked at him. Then he tipped his head slightly, an invitation rather than a command. They moved through the crowd, which had gone quiet. Some people stared, mouths tight. Others averted their eyes. She walked beside him, not behind. Her silence wasn't submission. It was strength wrapped in silence. At the wagon, James gestured toward the shaded side. She paused, then climbed up. He took the reins without comment, flicked them lightly, and the wagon began its slow departure from the square, the platform, the watchful eyes. Li Hua sat stiff-backed, hands folded in her lap, heart galloping. James said only one thing on that long ride out of town. She didn't know the meaning of the words, but something in his tone made her believe them. For the first time in weeks, she let her lungs expand fully. She breathed. The wagon wheels creaked. The dust curled behind them like smoke, rising into the fading gold of the afternoon light. James held the reins in one hand. The other rested loosely on his thigh. He didn't look at her, didn't speak. Beside him, the girl, small, still, wrapped in a faded shawl, held a cloth bag to her chest like it contained her entire life. She didn't meet his eyes. Her gaze stayed fixed on the horizon, knuckles white against the bag strap. He glanced at her once, twice, measuring the distance between them. She hadn't said a word, not when he helped her into the wagon, not as the town slipped away behind them, and the plains opened up in all directions. By the time the cabin came into view, low and simple, flanked by a barn and two fences worn gray by wind, the sun had dropped, casting the valley in a hush of amber light. James drew the horses to a stop and stepped down. He didn't offer her a hand. He figured she wouldn't want it yet. She climbed down slowly, her bag tight to her chest. Her eyes scanned the space, woodpile, chicken coop, chimney smoke curling upward like a question. No one else. Just him and the wind. He pointed toward the porch. "Your room's to the left," he said. "There's warm water in the basin." She didn't reply, but she passed him and stepped through the door, like a person walking into the unknown. He exhaled, slow and quiet, a breath he hadn't known he was holding. Inside, she walked the small cabin with deliberate care. She didn't explore. She simply stood in the far corner for a long minute, then knelt beside the bed and placed her bag gently down. The room was modest, but clean. A simple cot, a washstand, a cracked mug with a dried lavender sprig tucked inside. Someone had once tried to make it welcoming. Maybe his late wife. Maybe James, in his own awkward, well-meaning way. Li Hua dipped her hands into the basin. The water was cool and clear. She washed her face, then her arms, scrubbing away the sweat and dust of the road. The memory of ropes, the hands of strangers. Her shoulders shook, but no tears came. In the main room, James lit a fire, removed his boots, and ladled stew into a bowl. But he didn't eat. He stood by the hearth, arms folded, staring into the flames. He could hear her movements, gentle, cautious. He knew she likely wouldn't sleep. He wouldn't, if he were her. As the fire crackled low, James picked up a blanket, opened the door, and stepped out into the barn. He never even glanced at the second bed in the house. That would have felt presumptuous, like claiming something he hadn't yet earned. It wasn't hers yet, but it sure as hell wasn't his. So he left the silence to her. In the barn, the horses shifted restlessly in their stalls, hooves thudding lightly against the wooden floor. James found a patch of straw near the wall and spread his blanket with practiced hands. The scent of hay, old pine, and leather filled the air, warm, earthy, familiar. He lay back, staring up into the shadowy beams above, letting the ache of the day melt into his joints. Inside the house, Li Hua lay still beneath her blanket. Her eyes stayed wide in the darkness, her shoes still on her feet. The unfamiliar hush wrapped around her. No footsteps, no muttering, no threat of a man standing just beyond the doorway. Only the pop of embers and the soft groan of settling wood. Cautiously, she slipped from the bed and padded barefoot to the window. Moonlight poured across the yard, pale and cool. The barn door was closed, but faint orange light glowed through the gaps between the slats. He was out there, alone. She didn't understand every word he had spoken, but she understood enough. He wasn't sleeping inside. He had given her the house, the bed, the quiet, space. She returned to bed and curled tighter beneath the blanket, cheek pressed against the pillow. The scent of cedar clung to the fabric. Strange but clean, comforting in a way she couldn't name. Slowly, her eyes began to close. The silence no longer felt like danger. It felt, for the first time, like mercy. Morning came before the sun had crested the hills, painting the sky with a gray blush that hinted at gold. Birds stirred in the brush, and a breeze rustled through the low grasses. Li Hua moved through the yard like a shadow, shawl drawn close, two metal pails swinging softly in her hands. She had filled them at the stream behind the field, and the cold water sloshed quietly with each step. From inside the barn, James watched, half concealed behind a support beam. He'd made a habit of it. these early morning vigils. He watched not with suspicion, but with a silent, patient reverence. She worked like someone trying to belong without asking. Every morning, before she disappeared back into her room, she left vegetables from the garden, scrawny carrots, soft onions, a handful of limp greens, neatly placed by the door. She never spoke, never lingered. James never knocked. He only left a tray outside her room each dawn. Warm bread, a boiled egg, a tin of black tea steaming gently in the hallway air. She never took it while he was watching, but when he returned, the tray was always empty. This was their language. This was their rhythm. Then one morning, something changed. When he lifted the tray, he found a small, folded square of linen resting on top. It was hand-stitched, uneven but careful. A red flower bloomed in one corner, delicate petals looped in thread. He turned it over in his hands slowly. No words, just cloth and quiet craftsmanship. But it spoke more than any letter could have. That evening, he made supper, rabbit stew, and a fresh loaf of bread. He set 2 bowls on the table, not side by side, but across from one another, like an open door with space between. She didn't come while he was there, but later, when he stepped outside to check the horses, he returned to find her bowl empty, washed, and placed back on the table. That night, he didn't return to the barn. He rolled out his blanket by the hearth in the main room, just far enough from her door to keep the space hers, just close enough to catch the warmth from a fire. She heard him. She always did. But she said nothing, didn't object. The light from the fire flickered through the gap beneath her door, painting her room with soft gold. She lingered in the kitchen a little longer. She rinsed vegetables with practiced hands, dried herbs from the window hook, folded dish towels, and straightened the hearth without being asked. She still didn't speak, but she was no longer just passing through like smoke. James noticed other things. The way her braid began to loosen by evening. The way her face tilted toward the trees when the wind whispered through the leaves. The way she never asked for anything, but always offered something. One evening, just as the sun melted into the western ridge, he found her seated on the porch steps. She was brushing soil from a bunch of wild onions, her knees drawn in, her cheeks pink from the heat of the day. He paused at the doorway, then cleared his throat gently. She looked up, startled, and froze. He stepped forward slowly, like a man approaching a skittish colt, then held out his hand, not reaching for hers, just open. "I don't know how much you understand," he said softly, voice low, almost hesitant. "But this house," he said, his voice low and even, "it's yours now. If you want it to be, you don't have to keep packing your things. You don't have to keep sleeping like you're ready to leave." She stared at him, motionless, unblinking. Then, slowly, so slowly, her gaze dropped, not in submission, not in fear. A breath slipped from her lips, soft and incomplete. Her shoulders trembled once. She held the onions a little closer to her chest like they might anchor her to the step. James didn't move toward her. He only nodded once, a gesture that asked for nothing. Then he turned and stepped back inside. That night, when she passed through the main room on quiet feet, she saw the handkerchief she had made. It lay folded beside a warm bowl of tea on the table, neat and waiting. Beside it, another square of cloth, blank, a gentle offering, a space held open for her to speak in her own way. Outside, the dry season had pressed its weight on the land. The soil cracked like tired skin, brittle and aching for rain. Even the chickens scratched at the dirt with dulled urgency, feathers fluffed in quiet protest. But inside the ranch, something tender had begun to take root. James never asked more than she was ready to give. He simply showed up day by day, showing her how things worked. No commands, no assumptions, just steady patience. He taught by doing. He waited until she was ready to try. They started with the chickens. He guided her hands gently, palms over hers, just long enough for her to feel the shape of the motion. Mixing oats, cornmeal, grit. He showed her how to scatter the feed wide, and even so the birds wouldn't fight, how to spot the dominant hen and shift the balance when needed. She nodded when she understood, mimicking him with deliberate care. Sometimes she'd exaggerate the gesture, just to be sure. And when he nodded back, something in her shoulders loosened. In the shadowed quiet of the barn, he led her to the old brown dairy cow, chewing slowly in her stall. James crouched beside the beast, showed her the rhythm. Stool first, bucket close, fingers curled and gentle, pressure, release. No jerking, no rush. Leah knelt beside him, braids swinging forward, hesitating. The first stream of milk went sideways. The second missed the pail altogether. But the third time, it landed clean. She looked up. He gave her a small, crooked smile. She didn't smile back, not yet, but her eyes brightened with something that looked a little like victory. Later that week, it was her turn to surprise him. She cleared a space in the kitchen, not large, but tidy, from the woven bag she brought the first day, still packed as if for fleeing. She pulled out dried banana leaves, a tin of sticky rice, and a single knotted cloth filled with ginger root. She peeled and sliced with silent precision, movements filled with memory. James stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching. When he stepped closer, curious, she didn't flinch. She only motioned to the table, pointed, "Sit." Then she handed him a banana leaf, tapped the rice, then the counter, 3 fingers, 3 taps. "Copy me," he tried. The leaf tore. The rice slid off the edge. Instead, she reached across, gently took his hands in hers, and guided him. Slow, careful, as he had done for her. The steam from the ginger pot drifted through the room, warm and sweet. That evening, they sat on the porch, bowls in their hands. Crickets chirped from the brush, and the last heat of the sun still clung to the porch rail. She handed him the bowl first. Sticky rice wrapped in leaf, drenched in ginger syrup. He took one bite, then another. He blinked, surprised. She looked down, hiding her face behind the rim of her bowl. But her hands paused for a moment, and he saw it then, the smallest breath of pride softening her shoulders. Li Hua froze. Her charcoal paused mid-stroke. The silence stretched heavy, not like the silence they had lived in before, but one brimming with memory, with weight. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he said, gently, carefully, like stepping around broken glass. She didn't look up, not right away. Her hand hovered over the paper, then slowly lowered the charcoal. One smudge of black dust trailed down the side of her thumb. He stepped closer, boots scuffing against the floorboards, and stopped beside the table. He didn't touch the drawings. He only looked. The first, fire swallowing a village, drawn with such precision that even the smoke seemed to move. The second, a child mid-run or mid-flight, arms reaching out as if to stop something that couldn't be stopped. The locket at his throat, detailed and fragile, seemed almost to shine against the ash-gray world. The third, the train, distant, relentless. A girl alone in the open doorway of the boxcar, her small figure huddled, eyes watching something that might never return. El Ihua sat still, shoulders tight, waiting. James let out a slow breath. "They're powerful," he said. Then, quieter, "You remember it all." "I don't know what happened," he continued, "but I think you don't ever carry it alone anymore." She glanced at him then, just once, but her eyes held the truth of what she'd drawn. Loss, escape, survival carved deep in the lines of her face, though she couldn't be much more than 20. She touched the edge of the last drawing, finger brushing the outline of the girl like a farewell. Then she pushed the page forward across the table, toward him. "For you," she whispered, the first word she had spoken aloud in his presence. James blinked. His throat felt tight. "Thank you," he said. He took the drawing with reverence, as if it might tear under his breath. She turned back to the paper, picked up the charcoal again. Her voice, when it came, was barely more than a breath. James didn't ask who. He didn't need to. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. The lamp hissed faintly. Rain tapped at the window in the soft hush of evening. And for the first time since she had arrived, they shared the same silence. Not as strangers, but as witnesses to each other's stories. James heard it first in town behind the blacksmiths, where a group of ranch hands talked too loud and too carelessly. He didn't flinch, just shifted the weight of the feed sack on his shoulder and walked on, but his jaw clenched. His hands stayed still too long when he got home that night. Li Hua felt it too. in the way the general store clerk no longer looked her in the eye, in the way the preacher's wife offered a smile thin as tissue paper, then turned before she could respond, in the way the children in the lane stopped giggling and stared as she passed. She didn't say a word about it. She didn't have to. Her silence had changed. No longer the silence of fear, but of knowing, of choosing dignity. James noticed. That evening, she sat quietly by the hearth, stitching a new cloth. Not red this time, blue, like the sky before dusk. He came in from the barn, dust on his boots, the scent of cedar trailing with him. He crouched beside her and watched her hands work. "I know what they're saying," he said at last. She kept sewing. "I don't care," he added. That made her pause. She looked up, slowly. Her eyes asked a question she didn't voice. "But do you understand?" He took a breath. Not to explain, not to defend, just to stay steady. "I won't let their noise get between what we've built here," he said. "Not between us. Not ever." She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded once and returned to her needle. The next Sunday, he hitched a wagon and shaved, wore his best shirt. At the door, he turned to her, hand outstretched, not demanding, just waiting. She stood in her simple cotton dress, hair combed back, the polished comb tucked like a crown behind her ear. The chapel fell quiet when they walked in. Heads turned. A cough echoed sharp from the back pew. But James didn't falter. He led her to the second row, sat beside her, hat on his knee. Li Hua sat with her spine straight, her eyes forward, not defiant, just present. The sermon was about grace that day, about how no man was without need of it. Afterward, as folks trickled out, a little girl with braids tugged at her mother's hand and pointed. "Mama," she whispered, "that lady looks like a story." Li Hua knelt down, smiled, and handed the girl a tiny cloth flower she'd sewn in her apron pocket. The whispers didn't stop, but over time they quieted. As harvest came and James helped fix the Joneses' roof, as Li Hua's ginger rice started showing up at church potlucks, as ailing Mrs. Barton swore no hands brewed tea like hers. He never introduced her as anything other than Li Hua. Not wife, not help, just her name. It was enough. In Dusty Creek, people remembered James Morgan, and they remembered the woman with the quiet hands and strong eyes who once embroidered fire and taught a rancher to say Sheen Heart.